Hello, my name is Jim McGillivray and this is the PipeBox, your source for all things piping. If you find this video useful, please give it a like and please subscribe to this YouTube channel to see more videos like this. We're going to go over a tune today and you can print out the music to this tune by going back to the description of this video on my YouTube channel. You will see a link to a PDF there. Today I would like to do with you a competition reel in 4 parts. The tune is called Bessie McIntyre. It was written by William McLean. William McLean lived from 1876 until 1957. He was one of Scotland's leading pipers in the 1890s and early 1900s, renowned as a player, a composer, a teacher, and an authority on the big music. The level of difficulty for this tune is pretty much intermediate. As competition reels go, it's not a particularly difficult tune. We're going to play Bessie McIntyre in a fairly open style. That is to say that the short notes aren't going to be too short and the long notes aren't going to be too long, but it's not going to be played round. It's going to have a slight bit of pointing and it's going to have lots of rhythm because we're going to pay very close attention to the offbeat. That is the beat between the beats, which is so important in reel play. Let's start by having a look at the whole score for a moment. Here we have 4 parts in 8 lines. Nothing too complicated. There isn't even a second ending in the tune. We'll do most of our work today on the first part, and the other parts will follow suit. The red circles in the first 2 lines point out a very specific 2-note pattern that is significant not only in the first part but throughout the tune, and especially in the first part. The green circles through the tune are all short notes that lesser experienced players tend to play ahead of the beat. We're going to talk about putting these short notes on the beat or on the offbeat as a way of generating rhythm in the tune. The purple circles highlight the GDE pattern that is very common in reels and which needs just the right pointing and consistency. Okay, that's the 25-cent tour. Now let's hear the whole tune played on a Blair digital chanter. At the start of bar 1, part 1, we see a 2-note couplet, a low A 16th note followed by a low A dotted 8th. If we look at the first 2 notes of each bar in the first part, we will see that that pattern continues. It's really important, those 2 notes, that you separate them, make sure it doesn't turn into a doubling, and make sure that the very first note is on the beat. Da da dee ga dee da dum ba da 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 dee dum ba da dee ba dee ga dee ba dum ba da 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 dee. Don't let it turn into da da dee ga dee da dee da 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 dee dum ba da dee da da. When we play like that, we put the D grace note on the beat rather than the very first low A. So, correct way of playing the first bar. Incorrect. Don't rush that couplet all the way through the first part. That couplet also appears in the ending and in the middles of the parts all the way through the tune, on B rather than low A, but the same principle still applies. Let's look at bar 2. In bar 2, we see two notes circled in green. They are short notes, and what is important about them is that they are being played on the offbeat. As I mentioned earlier, the offbeat is the beat that happens between the beats. So if we sing the first couple of bars of this tune, just listening to the on beat, what we hear is this. If we put the offbeat in there as well as the on beat, we hear this. That on-beat, off-beat pattern continues and drives through the whole tune. In bar 2, the short C that is circled in green and the F that is circled in green must be placed squarely on the offbeat and not ahead of it. So bar 2, less experienced players have a tendency to want to put the long note after the short note on the beat rather than the short note, something like this. So in those first two bars, make sure the low A's are separated and make sure the short notes are on the offbeat. We see more green circles in bar 4, which is the middle of the part. Again, we have a couplet on B rather than low A that you're going to keep nice and separated. Don't let the G grace note and the D grace note turn into a doubling. Then the following C and the short E at the end of the bar are going to be on the offbeat. Hadum bicka dee da dee da dum buddy da 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 dee dum bicka dicka da da dum buddy da da dee. So wait for all those offbeat short notes. That same pattern appears in bar 6, and then we get to the ending and it appears again. That's all there is for the first part. Let's hear the first part played on the practice chanter. There are just a couple of notes we really need to talk about in part 2. In bar 1, you'll see that I've circled a short C in green. That is another note that needs to be squarely on the offbeat. We've talked about that in part 1, and it applies here too. A second point I would like to make about that little 4-note pattern there is, in an open style reel, we're not going to play the short notes very short. The short notes are well enunciated throughout the tune. They're never crushed, they're never clipped out of existence. For example, in that first bar. Not. Avoid that. Strive for this. So, short notes are not too short, and make sure you get those offbeat notes squarely on the offbeat. If we look at bar 3, we see a green circle in the middle of the bar. That's another short note that needs to be played on a beat, and this time it actually has to be played on the on beat rather than the offbeat, so it's even more important. So, bar 3. Really enunciate that F and make sure you don't play it early. Don't put the following high A on the beat. Keep the short F on the beat. Avoid. wait for the short F. That bar 5 is the same as bar 1. In bar 7, we have another short note that needs to be paid attention to because it is a tocsin. The B circled near the end of the bar is followed by a D grace note to low A. And pipers sometimes tend to crush toccins in reels and 2/4 marches, but particularly in reels. So keep that B nice and open on the way down to the low A. Avoid really enunciate the B on the offbeat well. And then the ending is, as we've talked before, a nice open couplet on B with the C and the E on the offbeat. And that's the second part. Let's hear that played on the practice chanter. The third part is dominated by the GDE pattern, which appears in bar 1, 3, and 5. GDEs in reels can be tricky. I have a whole video devoted to playing GDEs in real time. If you haven't seen it, you might want to have a look at it before you do the third part of Bessie McIntyre. In summary, the trick here is to not overpoint your GDEs. They aren't round like a billiard ball, but the short notes are well articulated and the dotted notes are still pretty well held. So, bar 1. You'll notice that I'm holding the low A before the D grace note. But I'm keeping the space between the D and the E grace note fairly large. What I want you to avoid is overpointing like this. Articulate your GDEs well. As I said, the first note, the G grace note, is held fairly long as you would normally make it, but don't put the D and the E grace notes too close together. The other thing you need to be able to do in this bar is play a D grace note on a short C. Right in the middle of the bar, right after the first GDE, is a C with a D grace note on it from low A. Make sure your D grace note gets closed and make sure you don't crush that note. Don't let it come out. Again, in open style reels, the short notes are well articulated throughout. That's the third part. Let's hear that on the practice chanter. The tune ends well with a great last part played mostly on the top hand. The first bar is the trickiest. You'll see I've circled 3 notes here in green. The first C is on the offbeat, the E is on the onbeat, and the second C is on the offbeat. It's important that those notes be played squarely on their beats or offbeats, and that they also be played nice and clearly, enunciated, like this. Avoid this. Avoid clipping it and avoid rushing it. Open them out, bounce off those low notes, make sure they're audible. One thing I do in that bar is I pause very, very slightly after the second high A. So I split the bar in half. Biddy, dutty, hutty, hutty, because that's where I find I tend to rush, is coming off that second high A. So in my mind, I have a tiny little pause on that second high A. That helps keep that bar on the beat for me. That's really all there is to the last part, except for the points that we have talked about before. Let's hear the last part played in the practice chanter. Before we close, I want to stress how important the metronome can be as a tool for developing rhythm in your playing. In reels, the offbeat is particularly important, as I've said all the way through this video. In fact, you can tap your foot on the offbeat through a reel and hardly notice the difference from tapping on the onbeat. For example, like this. Hee-o, dum-ba-dum, buddy-dum-ba-duddy-dum, big-a-dick-a-dum-ba-dum, buddy-da-duddy-dum, big-a-dick-a-dum-ba-dum, buddy-dum-ba-duddy-dum, big-a-dum-ba-dick-a-dum, buddy-dee-dum-ba-dick-a-dick-a-dum-ba-duddy. That was playing the tune, clapping on the offbeat. And those offbeats will tell you exactly where notes need to go. For a change, sometime, take a reel that you play and play the tune just tapping your foot on the offbeat instead of the onbeat, and you'll find you get a different perception of the tune altogether. In terms of tempo, optimum tempo for competition reels tends to be around 84 beats per minute, 82 to 84, although you will hear reels as slow as in the upper 70s, 78, 80. Again, if, as I always say in my videos, if you're working on technique and you don't have the technical facility yet to play a reel at 84 beats per minute, you play the reel at whatever tempo you need to play it at to play it technically well. That's your starting point, and work up from there. Another point with the metronome, if I want to play a reel at 82 beats per minute, I will double time the metronome to 164. So now I'm hearing the beats and the offbeats. And you can play to the metronome, but I find it really valuable to sing to it. That gives me a really great rhythmic sense of the tune. Do icka ticka ticka do daddy dum ba daddy do ticka 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 dum buddy dum bicka ticka ticka dum buddy dum ba daddy dum bicka ticka ticka dum buddy da hoppa ticka ticka dum ba daddy hoppa ticka dee hoppa ticka ticka daddy dum ba daddy da hoppa ticka ticka dum. The offbeat is a really valuable tool in reel playing. Learn how to use it. Okay. That's it for Willie McLean's Bessie McIntyre. I hope you enjoy the tune as much as I have over the years. From me, Jim McGillivray at the PipeBox, good piping.